Stop, I'll be your obedient wife." The words tore from her throat like the last cry of a trapped animal. Her voice shook the canyon's silence as she fell to her knees, dust rising around her like smoke. The Apache widow's hands trembled against the hard ground, her long black hair tangled with blood and sand. Above her, framed by the dying light of the desert sun, stood the cowboy, his revolver raised, his shadow stretching over her like a judgment. His eyes were cold, steady, unreadable, but the trembling of his jaw betrayed the storm beneath. He hadn't meant for this to happen. It was supposed to be a trade, an exchange of peace for silence. He had found her stealing water from his well, and the lawless land of Arizona Territory didn't forgive trespassers easily, especially not those with Apache blood. But something in the woman's face, those sharp cheekbones, that quiet fire in her eyes, had stopped him from pulling the trigger. She wasn't just another survivor of the wars. She was defiance made flesh, too proud to beg, until now. The setting sun painted her skin in gold and fire. "You kill me, you kill the last of my people," she said, her voice breaking. "But if you let me live, I'll serve you. I'll work your land, I'll be your wife. Just don't send me back to die." The cowboy's grip on his gun tightened. He had heard enough lies to fill a graveyard. He'd seen women barter promises to stay alive, then vanish at the first chance. But this one didn't look away. She met his stare, her tears shining like glass, her words burning through the air with a truth that felt almost sacred. He lowered the gun, just an inch. "You'd be my wife, knowing I could have shot you dead?" he asked quietly. She nodded, her lips trembling. "Better a wife to the man who spared me than a ghost to the men who won't." The desert wind sighed between them, carrying the scent of dust and distant thunder. Somewhere beyond the hills, a coyote howled. The cowboy holstered his gun slowly, watching her rise to her feet, her posture fragile but proud. Something inside him shifted, a spark of guilt, of something dangerously close to mercy. "Then get up, Mrs. Nobody," he said. "You've just married the loneliest man in Arizona." Image prompt for Part 1. A tense Wild West sunset scene in a canyon, an Apache widow kneeling in the dust with tears on her face. A rugged cowboy stands over her with a revolver raised, dramatic golden light and storm clouds in the background. Part 2. The wind howled through the broken windows of the ranch that night. She sat by the fire, her torn dress mended with rough thread, her eyes fixed on the flames as he watched her from across the room. They hadn't spoken since sunset. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one across the table. "Drink," he said. She hesitated, then obeyed, slowly, silently, every movement graceful yet cautious, like a wild animal pretending to be tame. "What's your name?" he asked finally. "Tayana," she whispered. "It means, little moon. My husband was killed last winter when your soldiers burned our camp." He flinched at the word, your. He'd never fought in that raid, but guilt in the West had a way of finding every man with a badge or a gun. "You don't have to serve me," he said after a long silence. "You can leave when you're ready." She turned to him, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "You think I have somewhere to go?" That night, she slept on the floor by the fireplace, curled beneath a blanket too thin for the cold. He lay awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing the soft rhythm of her breathing. Something inside him warred. A part of him wanted to send her away, the other part wanted to protect her, even from the ghosts of his own past. Days turned to weeks. She worked beside him in the fields, quiet and tireless. She spoke little, but her presence softened the edges of his loneliness. One evening, as a storm rolled in, he found her standing barefoot in the rain, her face lifted to the sky. "You miss them," he said quietly. "Your people." She nodded, the rain washing her tears away. "Every night," she whispered. "But I am still here. Maybe for a reason." When lightning split the sky, he saw her eyes flash, not with fear, but with a strength that shook him. "You don't belong as anyone's servant," he said. "And you don't have to call me husband." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "I said I'd be your wife. Not because you wanted it, but because I needed to live." Maybe that's the same thing now. Image prompt for Part 2. Inside a dim ranch house during a storm, the Apache widow sits near a flickering fire while a cowboy watches her from across the room. Rain streaks the window, tension and quiet emotion fill the air. Part 3. Months passed, and the farm began to change. Where the soil had once been dry, crops now rose strong. The cattle grew fat, and the air seemed less cruel. Neighbors whispered about the cowboy with the Apache wife, about how she spoke to the land as if it could hear her. Some said she had brought a curse, others swore it was a blessing. He didn't care what they said. The silence that once haunted his home had become a song, the soft clatter of dishes, her quiet humming at dawn, the steady heartbeat of two souls surviving together in a world that wanted neither of them. But the peace was fragile. One evening, riders came, men with dust on their boots and hate in their eyes. "You got an Apache woman here," one of them barked. The cowboy stood in the doorway, hand resting on his gun. "She's my wife," he said. The leader spat into the dirt. "Then she dies with you." Before he could draw, Tayana stepped forward, her hand resting on her husband's arm. "No," she said softly. "Let me speak." She walked into the yard, the twilight wrapping her in crimson and shadow. "You came to kill the last ghost of your war," she said, her voice calm, strong. "But ghosts don't die twice." The men laughed, but something in her eyes made them falter. The wind rose suddenly, fierce and cold, whipping through the fields. "Leave," she said again, and this time the earth itself seemed to answer her. Dust swirled, the horses reared, and the riders turned, terrified, not of bullets, but of the power in her voice. When silence returned, the cowboy looked at her, awe and fear tangled in his chest. "What are you?" he whispered. She turned toward him, her expression soft. A woman who learned to survive. That night, as the firelight flickered, she leaned against him for the first time. "You spared me once," she said. "Now I've spared you." He smiled faintly. "Guess that makes us even, Mrs. Nobody." But Tayana shook her head. "No," she murmured, her voice barely a breath. "That makes us home." The rain began that night, soft at first, like whispers against the windows, then harder, until it sounded like 1,000 footsteps on the roof. The wind howled through the canyons, rattling the shutters, and the cowboy, Samuel Hart, sat near the fire, watching the Apache woman in silence. She hadn't spoken much since he'd brought her back to the ranch. She kept her distance, moved quietly through the house, and when she wasn't working outside, she sat near the hearth, staring into the flames like they held the faces of the dead. He poured 2 cups of coffee, slid one across the table toward her. "You should eat something," he said. She hesitated, her hands still bound loosely with rope. He noticed the raw skin around her wrists and sighed, cutting the rope with his knife. "You're free now, but if you run, I won't come after you." She looked up at him, eyes dark and glimmering in the firelight. "And if I stay?" she asked softly. "Then you'll work, and you'll live," he said. "That's more than most get out here." She drank quietly, her hands trembling only once before she steadied them. "You didn't ask my name," she said finally. He glanced up. "Would you have told me?" Her lips curved in the faintest smile. "Tayana, my husband was a warrior. Your soldiers shot him in the back when he went to trade for grain." The cowboy's jaw tightened. "I wasn't part of that," he muttered. "But you wear their boots," she replied quietly. He didn't answer. Hours passed in silence. The fire burned low, casting long shadows on the wooden floor. Samuel leaned back, hat tipped over his eyes, pretending to sleep. But his mind was restless. Every time the wind howled, he imagined the world outside, the soldiers, the raiders, the endless, godless desert that had already claimed too many souls. Then he heard her humming, a soft, wordless tune. The sound was haunting, yet beautiful, like a prayer for something long lost. Days slipped into weeks. She stayed, though he never asked her to. She mended his torn shirts, cooked simple meals, worked the land beside him. She was small but strong, unyielding, her every motion filled with quiet grace. When she smiled, it was like sunlight breaking through the storm. One evening, after fixing the fence, Samuel found her standing barefoot in the dust, watching the sunset burn across the hills. "You miss your home," he said quietly. She didn't turn. "My home burned," she replied. "But the earth still remembers us." That night, as thunder rolled across the plains, he woke to find her standing by the window, wrapped in a blanket, her eyes wide and full of firelight. "You could have killed me," she whispered. "Why didn't you?" He hesitated, then said, "Because you looked at me like you already knew my sins." She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "Then you know mine too. I wasn't always innocent. I fought, I bled, I hated your kind." The words cracked in her throat. "But hate dies slow, and I'm tired of carrying it." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he reached for the whiskey bottle, poured a glass, and handed it to her. "To the ghosts," he said. She nodded, touching the rim of her glass to his. To the ones we keep alive, she replied. The fire hissed, and for the first time since the desert had thrown them together, the silence between them didn't feel like a battlefield, it felt like a truce. Image prompt for part 2. A quiet night inside an old wooden ranch house during a thunderstorm. An Apache woman wrapped in a blanket stands near the window, firelight reflecting on her face. A weary cowboy sits by the table with a whiskey bottle and a half-empty glass. The atmosphere is heavy, intimate, and filled with unspoken emotion.